The pen moved as if guided by something older than decision, perhaps inevitability itself. Mara smiled when she signed. Not because she was free, but because she'd finally stopped trying to save something already drowned. Across from her, Daniel couldn't meet her eyes, his thumbs circling the table's edge like he was tracing the border of regret. The papers whispered when she pushed them forward. The sound was so small, so human, it almost broke her. The lawyer cleared his throat, indifferent. The world's quiet executioner of vows. Outside, sunlight pierced through rain. A strange, divided light that painted the skyline in contradiction. Mara walked out, chin high, heart trembling, and thought the silence following her was the kindest goodbye she'd ever received. That smile, the one she forced, would soon return. But this time for something she could never have imagined. Days passed like quiet pages turned by invisible fingers. The world didn't change for Mara. It simply felt rearranged. The apartment she returned to smelled of lavender and dust, the plants leaning toward light that never seemed to reach them. Her friend Claire called often, her voice like a lifeline Mara never picked up. Instead, she filled silence with small rituals, boiling water, folding towels, pretending peace could be folded too. The smile she'd worn at the signing still lingered in mirrors, haunting her reflection with its practiced grace. Nights were longer now, not in hours but in depth, where thought and memory wrestled beneath a single flickering lamp. And just when she began to believe solitude might stay kind, a knock. One slow, uncertain knock broke through the fragile quiet, shattering everything she'd rehearsed about healing. The door creaked open to reveal a man Mara had never expected to see. Eli, Daniel's new husband. His eyes carried storms, his breath the tremor of someone unraveling. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Rain dripped from his coat onto her welcome mat, spelling out small, chaotic shapes. She almost laughed, thinking how absurd life could be, how grief liked to return dressed as surprise. When he finally whispered her name, it sounded less like greeting, more like confession. Something inside her shifted, an old compassion waking from sleep. Yet behind his trembling hands and wet hair, she saw something darker, fear. And before she could ask why he'd come, he said it, voice cracking. "Please, I need your help. It's Daniel." Mara let him in before logic could intervene. The air filled with the scent of wet wool and old rain. Eli's hands shook as he spoke, words tumbling out like stones. Daniel had disappeared 2 nights ago after an argument. No calls, no note, just vanished. The police weren't taking it seriously yet. Mara sat down slowly, absorbing the chaos. Her mind wanted distance, but her heart betrayed her, leaning closer. She remembered Daniel's silences, how he used to disappear emotionally long before he ever left. It made sense in a way that terrified her. Eli looked at her, eyes searching for something. Hope, maybe. Instead, she offered the one thing she could still give, the truth that love, even broken, doesn't stop you from caring. Outside, the storm thickened. Inside, something began again, an unfinished thread between loss and duty. Mara fetched a blanket for Eli, her hands steady now. As thunder rolled, she thought of Daniel's last words the day of their divorce. "You will thank me one day." Maybe this was the day. Or maybe it was the world's cruel joke, binding the broken to repair what shattered them. Either way, she knew she couldn't turn away. In that fragile, rain-bound room, 2 people, once bound to the same man, waited for dawn, neither realizing that by sunrise, the story they shared would no longer belong to the past. Morning found them both in the quiet aftermath of questions that hadn't yet been asked. Mara brewed coffee, while Eli sat motionless, watching steam rise like a silent confession. The storm had cleared, but left the world damp and trembling. Daniel's name hung between them like the ghost of a shared wound. When Eli finally spoke, it was in fragments. mentions of bruised words, unanswered calls, and a message left unsent on Daniel's phone. "I can't keep pretending." Mara didn't flinch, though something deep within her did. She remembered that tone, that invisible fracture between staying and breaking. The way love could rot beneath the surface unnoticed until it collapsed. And yet, there was something more in Eli's voice, something that didn't fit the script of a husband merely afraid, something that smelled like guilt. Eli's hands trembled as he showed her the message on his phone. Daniel's last words, time-stamped at 2:14 a.m., 2 nights ago. "Don't look for me." The text glowed pale against his skin. Mara felt her pulse shift, not with fear, but recognition. She'd heard that voice before, in every silence that used to fill their bedroom. Still, she refused to believe disappearance equaled despair. "Maybe he just needed space," she said, but her voice cracked under the weight of false hope. Eli looked up sharply. "You don't know him like I do." Mara met his gaze, steady but wounded. "Maybe not anymore, but I knew him before you did." The sentence hung there, heavy and final. The air between them thickened, not just with worry, but with the strange intimacy of two people grieving the same man for different reasons. They drove together through the city's gray arteries, chasing a ghost neither could define. Daniel's office first, locked, his car unmoved in the underground garage. Every turn of the wheel brought more questions and fewer answers. Eli's silence deepened, his grip on the steering wheel white-knuckled. Mara stared out the window, her reflection overlapping with the city's fractured skyline. She thought of how easily love became habit, and habit became absence. Eli stopped suddenly in front of a park Daniel used to run in. "He used to come here when he was angry," Eli said. Mara nodded, remembering. They stepped out into the wind, the morning cold biting their hands, and for a moment, it felt like walking back through memory. Only this time, neither of them knew what they hoped to find. They split up to search. Mara following the path by the lake, Eli circling the benches near the trees. Every sound felt amplified. Rustling leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the soft slap of water against stone. Then she saw it, a scarf tangled in reeds, navy blue with faint stripes. Daniel's. Her breath hitched. She called out, voice cracking through the morning stillness. Eli came running, panic widening his eyes. When he saw the scarf, he went pale, reaching for it as if it might still be warm. Mara watched him crumble, guilt twisting her empathy into confusion. Something about his reaction felt rehearsed, as though he'd been expecting to find proof, not of loss, but of consequence. Back at her apartment, the silence felt heavier than before. The scarf lay between them on the coffee table, dripping quietly into the grain of the wood. Eli spoke in half-sentences, his voice trembling between grief and something else. He said he was tired, that I didn't understand what he carried. Mara stared at the fabric darkening the wood and realized she'd once said the same thing to Daniel, word for word. She looked up sharply. Eli met her eyes, and for the first time she saw the crack in his composure. Fear wasn't all that lived there. Beneath it flickered something jagged, remorse. She didn't yet know for what, but as thunder rolled again in the distance, she understood one thing clearly. Daniel wasn't just missing. He'd been running from something neither of them was ready to name. Sleep didn't come for either of them. Mara sat at the kitchen table, the scarf now dry but heavier somehow, as if it had absorbed every unspoken truth. Eli stood by the window, staring out at the city that no longer looked like home. He was seeing someone, Eli murmured finally, his reflection fractured in the glass. After me? The words hit like a quiet storm. Mara wanted to ask who, but something in his tone told her he didn't know, or didn't want to. The night pressed in close, old memories stirred. The way Daniel used to hum when nervous, how he'd trace invisible shapes on her wrist when lost in thought. She realized with a cold ache that they were both still orbiting him, drawn by gravity they couldn't break. Outside, sirens wailed faintly, pulling their thoughts toward the dark places where truth often hides. By morning, the exhaustion felt like a physical weight pressing behind their eyes. Mara brewed another pot of coffee, the ritual now mechanical. Ely's phone buzzed. A withheld number. He hesitated, then answered. A voice spoke quickly, muffled, low. His face went rigid, color draining. "That was Daniel's office," he whispered when it ended. "They said someone accessed his email account last night." Mara's pulse sharpened. "So he's alive?" Ely shook his head. "Maybe. But it wasn't from his home computer." They exchanged a look that said more than fear. It was realization. Someone was moving inside Daniel's story, unseen. Mara grabbed her coat before thinking, "Then we find out who." She didn't know why she cared anymore, only that she couldn't stop. Not until she understood why the man who had once broken her heart had vanished into silence. They arrived at Daniel's office, a minimalist space high above the city. All glass and sterile calm. The receptionist's eyes flickered when she saw Mara, recognition sharpening her politeness into discomfort. "We weren't expecting," she began. But Ely cut in, voice tight. "We're looking for Daniel." The woman hesitated, then leaned closer. "Someone came in last night, used his keycard, but it wasn't him." Mara felt her chest tight. "Who was it?" A pause. "A woman." Ely turned toward Mara, confusion mixing with dread. She didn't respond, only moved toward Daniel's desk, still neat, papers squared, pen placed parallel to the monitor. But one thing was off. A photo frame face down, its glass cracked. She flipped it over. It was a picture of Daniel and Ely, happy, unguarded. The crack sliced clean across both their faces. The security guard replayed the footage, grainy and cold. A woman entered Daniel's office at 11:47 p.m., hooded, moving fast, her face never visible. She typed on his computer, erased something, then left within minutes. Ely leaned closer to the screen. "Pause it," he said. The figure's hand flashed briefly under light. Silver bracelet, narrow wrist. Mara's breath caught. She knew that bracelet. Claire had worn it the last time they'd met for coffee, her best friend. The name tasted wrong in her mouth now, bitter with betrayal. Ely noticed her face. "You know her," she nodded, barely. The footage flickered to black, and the silence that followed was thicker than any storm. If the water remembered, so did betrayal. That evening, Mara drove alone, following the trail of disbelief toward Claire's apartment. The city pulsed in neon veins, reflections smearing across her windshield like liquid memory. When Claire opened the door, her eyes carried guilt before words even formed. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. Mara stepped forward, voice steady despite the quake beneath it. "Why were you in his office?" Claire's lip trembled. "Because Daniel asked me to." The sentence landed like a wound reopening. "He said if anything happened, I was to erase his files. He didn't want anyone finding them. Not even Ely." Mara froze, realization burning slow and bright. What was he hiding? Claire's eyes darted away. "Not what, Mara?" "Who outside?" The rain began again, soft as confession. Claire's apartment smelled like wilted lilies and regret. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, each page marked with Daniel's handwriting. Notes, sketches, fragments of something larger. "He was working on an exposé," Claire said softly. "Financial misconduct in his firm. People powerful enough to make him disappear." Mara sank onto the couch, the world tilting. She remembered Daniel's restlessness, how he'd always chased justice like it was a drug. Ely arrived moments later, breathless and suspicious, his gaze darting from Claire to Mara. "You knew," he accused. "You both knew he was in trouble." Mara's voice cracked under the weight of truth. "He didn't tell me everything. He never did." The storm that had followed them through days and doubts now swelled into something else, fear sharpened by the scent of betrayal. In that small, dim room, Daniel's ghost felt closer than ever. They spread the papers out, trying to make sense of the chaos. Numbers, shell companies, hidden transfers. Daniel had been tracing money that vanished through invisible lines. Mara recognized names, people from dinners, charity galas, faces that had smiled at her without warmth. Eli hovered, his hands restless, eyes darting between pages. Claire bit her lip. He said if anything happened to him, it meant he got too close. Mara's stomach turned. Close to what? Claire hesitated, then whispered, to his boss, and someone helping from inside. The realization settled heavy and slow, Eli's face tightening as if bracing for impact. You think I had something to do with it? He spat. No, Mara said quietly, though she wasn't sure anymore. Silence fell, fragile as glass. Somewhere outside, sirens wailed again, echoing through the rain, like memory replaying itself. Later, when Claire stepped into the kitchen, Mara pulled one sheet aside, a confidential email draft Daniel had never sent. It was addressed to her. The subject line, "If I disappear." Her breath hitched as she read the words, each line written like a confession wrapped in apology. I never stopped loving you. But I couldn't stop chasing the truth either. He'd found something that implicated someone close. Eli's company, Claire's client, all intertwined. Her fingers trembled as she read the final line. Trust no one, not even the ones who come to you for help. The air went still, heavy with invisible eyes. When Eli called her name, she folded the letter quickly, heart thudding. He stepped closer, the distance between them charged with secrets neither could unhear. Mara's hands gripped the steering wheel as she drove, the letter hidden in her coat pocket. Eli rode beside her in silence, face turned toward the rain-smeared window. They were headed to Daniel's old firm, to find what he'd been trying to expose. The city around them felt stretched thin, colors bleeding through wet glass. Mara's mind raced, Daniel's warning looping in her thoughts like a curse. Trust no one. She studied Eli's reflection in the window, the way his jaw clenched every few seconds. Was it grief or guilt that stiffened him? She couldn't tell anymore. When they stopped at a red light, Eli finally spoke. If he's gone because of me, he didn't finish. The light turned green. She pressed the gas without answering, the silence between them louder than truth. They broke into Daniel's office just after midnight, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the dark. The hum of the city outside barely reached them here. Filing cabinets, empty drawers, the ghost of order, masking panic. Then Mara found it. An external drive taped beneath the desk, labeled only with Daniel's initials. She felt the pulse of revelation in her fingertips. Eli crouched beside her, whispering, "We should turn it in." But she hesitated. Daniel hadn't trusted anyone, not even her. If this drive held the truth, it could ruin lives, or end theirs. The storm outside cracked like judgment, thunder rolling through the glass. "He wanted me to find it," she said quietly. Eli looked at her then, eyes unreadable, the reflection of lightning cutting through both their faces. For the first time, Mara wondered if Daniel's warning had come too late. The apartment felt too small for the weight of what they carried. Mara plugged the flash drive into her laptop, her fingers trembling as the screen flickered to life. Files appeared, financial ledgers, encrypted folders, audio clips labeled by date. Eli stood behind her, arms crossed, trying to mask the tension rippling beneath his stillness. One audio file caught her eye. Mara recording Dawn. She clicked it before she could think. Daniel's voice filled the room, low, tired, unguarded. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone." "You were right, Mara. Love without truth isn't love at all." She froze. The sound of his breathing, his pauses, it was too real. Then his voice changed, sharper. "And Eli, if you're there, I know what you did. The room went silent, air thick with the ghost of accusation. Eli's face turned pale. And in that moment, Mara realized truth could destroy as easily as it could save. Eli's voice cracked. "He's lying." The words fell flat against the quiet. Mara turned slowly, searching his face for something human beneath the panic. "Then why does it sound like confession?" she whispered. Eli began pacing, running his hands through his hair. He was paranoid, seeing ghosts everywhere. He thought everyone was out to betray him. Mara felt anger rise, not from hate, but from heartbreak. Maybe he was right. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. She looked back at the screen. The next file's name burned through her. Final record. But Eli snatched the drive before she could open it. "No more," he said, voice shaking. "You don't know what's in there." Mara stared at him, realizing she no longer recognized the man she'd let into her home. "Then show me," she said softly, "or I'll find out myself." Eli stormed out into the hallway, his voice echoing against the narrow walls. Mara followed, the storm of questions chasing her down every step. "You think I hurt him? You think I'd ever—" He stopped himself, jaw trembling. "I loved him, Mara." The words came out broken, bleeding truth and denial in equal measure. She took a step closer. "Then why did he sound afraid of you?" The corridor lights flickered, the hum of electricity pulsing like a heartbeat. Eli pressed a hand to his forehead, voice dropping to a whisper. "Because he found out something about me I couldn't take back." Mara's breath caught. "What did you do?" But Eli only turned away, retreating down the stairwell, his footsteps fading into the building's hollow quiet. She stood there, shaking, with only the echo of Daniel's voice left between them. Hours later, Mara sat alone, the drive clutched tight in her palm. She plugged it back in, ignoring the trembling of her hands. The second recording began with static, then Daniel's voice, softer this time, weary, almost forgiving. "If Eli ever comes to you, it means he's scared. Help him if you can. But don't trust what he says about me." Her breath faltered. "They're watching him too. He doesn't even know." The audio cracked, then a final line, faint but clear. "The proof isn't on this drive. It's in the water." Silence followed, broken only by the storm outside. She played the line again and again until it stopped sounding human, until it became prophecy. The water, the lake, the scarf. Every thread looped back to where they had begun. Daniel hadn't disappeared. He'd left a trail, and she was already standing on it. By dawn, the decision was made. Mara slipped into her coat and drove toward the lake, the sky bruised with morning. The city still slept, unaware of the secrets rising beneath its quiet surface. The road wound through mist and memory, every turn pulling her deeper into the story Daniel had left unfinished. When she arrived, the world was still. A mirror of gray water, stretching toward fog. She stepped out, scarf in hand, the same one she'd found tangled in reeds. The ground felt soft beneath her feet, damp with dew and something older. "If you're out there," she whispered, voice trembling, "I'm still listening." Then, as if in answer, a ripple broke across the lake, slow, deliberate, widening toward her. It wasn't the wind. It was something surfacing. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and rust. Mara's shoes sank slightly into the muddy shoreline as the first light of morning trembled across the water. The ripple she'd seen was gone, but the feeling remained, an unseen presence just beneath the surface. She crouched, touching the water's edge, her reflection bending like truth under pressure. A faint shimmer caught her eye, a piece of metal glinting beneath the reeds. She reached in, pulling free a small waterproof case coated in silt. Her heart pounded. Inside was a phone, sealed and dead but intact. Daniel's. She pressed it to her chest, breath ragged. The lake hadn't taken him. It had been keeping his secret. She turned toward the car, the phone cold in her palm, unaware that far across the water, a figure was watching her through the fog. Back at her apartment, Mar placed the phone on the table beside her laptop, hands still trembling from cold and adrenaline. Eli hadn't called, though she half expected him to. She connected the device to her charger, waiting for life to return to its black screen. The moment it buzzed, she flinched. Messages began appearing. Dozens of them, all unread. The last one was sent at 2:16 a.m., the night Daniel vanished. If you find this, it means I didn't. Trust the lake. It knows where they buried it. Her breath caught. They, she whispered aloud. Before she could open the attachments, the phone's screen flashed once and went dark. Overheated, maybe, or remotely wiped. She stared at her own reflection in the blank glass, and for the first time saw not grief, but resolve. She called Claire first. No answer. Then she tried Eli. Straight to voicemail. The silence between rings felt alive, predatory. Mara's instincts screamed that whatever Daniel had uncovered wasn't just about money. She opened her laptop and checked the files again. Most were unreadable, but one folder had a GPS coordinate embedded in the metadata. Her pulse quickened as she mapped it. Not far, the old quarry beyond the lake abandoned years ago after a flood. She printed the map, slid it into her jacket, and grabbed a flashlight. The moment she stepped outside, a shadow moved near her building's entrance, a man in a dark coat, watching. When she blinked, he was gone. The echo of her own heartbeat filled the silence as she started the car. The truth was calling, and this time it had a location. The road to the quarry, wound through forest and fog, silence thick as cloth. Morris headlights cut narrow tunnels through the mist, illuminating trees bowed under rain. When she arrived, the old gate hung open, rusted and forgotten. She stepped out, flashlight trembling in her hand, breath visible in the cold. Water pooled across the gravel, reflecting fractured moonlight. Then, faintly, she heard it. A phone ringing somewhere in the dark. She followed the sound to the quarry's edge, where the lake widened like an open wound. The ring stopped. Her light caught something metallic near the shoreline. A piece of Daniel's car, half submerged. She stumbled closer, pulse hammering. There, caught in the reeds, was a wallet. His. Time folded in on itself. The water had indeed remembered. The wind picked up, carrying whispers through the trees. Mara held Daniel's wallet in both hands, her flashlight trembling as it caught the outline of another figure across the lake. Eli. His face was pale in the half-light, soaked and wild-eyed. "You shouldn't be here," he shouted, voice breaking through fog. "You don't understand." She took a step back. "Then, explain it." He hesitated, hands raised, shaking. "It wasn't supposed to happen. They were watching me too. He wasn't supposed to die." The air between them cracked open with thunder. Mara's chest tightened as realization dawned. Eli wasn't Daniel's betrayer. He was the last loose end. Behind him, movement. Two silhouettes emerging from the mist. Men in dark coats, deliberate and silent. Mara turned toward the car, clutching the drive, her heartbeat sensing with the storm. The storm broke open, wind tearing through the quarry as lightning fractured the sky. Mara, shoes slipping on soaked gravel, heart slamming against ribs. Behind her, Eli's voice cracked through the rain. "Run!" Followed by the dull thud of pursuit. The flash drive dug into her palm like a pulse. She stumbled, turned, and saw one of the men closing in, broad-shouldered, faceless behind a rain-slick hood. The second man grabbed Eli, forcing him to his knees. "He told you everything!" one shouted. Mara's voice barely carried through the storm. "He told me enough." The man raised his arm. A gun. Lightning flashed again, freezing the world in a single frame of fear. Then, a sound sharper than thunder. Eli lunged, tackling the gunman into the mud, the weapon skidding toward the water's edge. Mara dove for it, her reflection splitting as she fell. Mara's fingers closed around the gun, her breath ragged, every instinct screaming to survive. Eli's voice echoed behind her, pleading, desperate. Before another sound cut through the chaos, a single gunshot. Time slowed. One of the men fell backward into the water, ripples swallowing the flash of blood beneath the rain. The second fled into the trees, leaving Eli gasping on the ground, one hand pressed to his shoulder. She rushed to him, water streaming down her face, indistinguishable from tears. "It's over," she whispered. Though both of them knew it wasn't. He looked up, rain, catching the fear in his eyes. "You need to finish it," he rasped. "The drive. Take it to the police." Mara nodded, gripping his hand. But when she looked down again, his grip had gone slack. The lake roared louder, as if mourning him, too. She buried him there, under a broken sky, marking the place with the scarf that had started it all. The storm calmed by dawn, leaving the quarry a mirror of still gray glass. Mara sat at the edge, numb and shaking, the flash drive clutched in both hands. The police would come soon, she'd make sure of it. But not yet. She opened her laptop in the car, inserting the drive for the last time. Hidden inside the encrypted folder was a single video file. Daniel appeared on screen, sitting in his office, looking straight into the camera. "If this reaches you," he said softly, "it means I failed to stop them. But maybe you can." He smiled faintly, that same sad half-smile she'd fallen in love with. "I left proof. Not to ruin anyone, but to set them free. Even Eli." The screen went black. Mara whispered his name into the silence. Weeks passed before the world learned the truth. The files she turned and exposed a corporate fraud that rippled through the city like shockwaves. Names she once knew appeared in headlines, their empires collapsing overnight. The papers called it the Water Ledger Scandal. Mara refused interviews. She didn't want fame. She wanted peace. She visited the lake once more, now cordoned by police tape and silence. The water was calm, forgiving. She thought of Daniel, not as the man who'd left her, or the one who'd vanished, but as the soul who'd finally found stillness through truth. "We found it," she whispered to the wind. The reflection that looked back at her no longer seemed haunted. It was whole. She smiled, a real one this time, and let the scarf slip from her hand into the water where it floated, soft and unburdened. Months later, Mara sold the apartment and moved to a small house by the sea. The walls smelled of salt and freedom, and the air carried no ghosts. She found herself smiling again, small, effortless smiles born from morning light and silence that didn't ache. On her desk sat Daniel's last photo, now unbroken, the crack repaired. Next to it, a letter from the police, case officially closed. She traced the words with a steady hand and looked out the window at waves collapsing against rock. Healing, she realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about forgiving the echoes that remain. She whispered a final goodbye into the sea breeze, and the sound of it, half sorrow, half grace, felt like music. Somewhere beneath the endless horizon, the water kept their story, quiet and complete.